Right. Let me remove this, then I can have you closer to me. Dear Morten, I'm so happy that you're here with us today on a sunny Friday afternoon in Germany or in Switzerland. And it's in the morning right now where you are, right?
Rainy morning in Vancouver, Canada.
Vancouver in Canada, a rainy morning. You were born in Norway, but you left Norway for Canada. And I'm so happy that you're here with us, ready to share with us your knowledge. And today, because of technology, the world has become small, and that's why ethics matter, right?
Yes.
Yes. Dear community, I'm so happy that Morten is here with us. If you have any comment or any question, our topic is why ethics in technology and design matters. And Morten is an instructor at LinkedIn Learning, educator, and also are you a professor or a lecturer at the University of Oslo?
No.
Would you like?
I'm at the University of, what is it called? The Simon Fraser University of Art and Design
Oh,
here in
wow.
Vancouver.
In
Because,
Vancouver,
why
okay.
have a short name when you can have a long name?
Why not? Exactly. Great. Would you like to introduce yourself? Maybe something I didn't mention before?
I live here in this house, well, not in this box, but in this house with my wife and our 5-year-old son, who is very eager to understand why I'm not having breakfast with him right now. I moved here to Vancouver in 2002. So I've been here for almost 20 years now. And although I'm a teacher who focuses on design and web technologies, my background is in philosophy. So I studied philosophy at university, and I've kind of returned to the philosophy part of my background over the past 7 or 8 years, because I've seen how our tech community and the design community doesn't, the things we do, our work directly impacts people's lives, and in a very profound way. Yet
Yes.
our community is not very aware of how, either deliberately or just accidentally not aware of how much that impact has an effect on people. And there's also very little desire to take on that responsibility. And this is where tech ethics come in as a thing that
Yes.
becomes very important.
Yes, and that's your motivation too to work in this. But first, tell your son I'm sorry. After 30 minutes, he'll have you back.
Oh, that's okay. He's drawing something, so I'm sure he'll have. He's I don't know why, but he's gotten very focused on Halloween lately. So he draws these very interesting ghosts characters all the time.
Right.
He's drawing ghosts right now, I think.
Wow. Great. Right. You mentioned it before. Before I show the points to the community, we're going to talk about it's just about how do you say we have to be aware of the decisions we make and what impact we create with our products, especially in the tech industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's all about taking responsibility.
Yeah, it's about taking responsibility and also just understanding that this type of work actually makes a difference.
Oh, yes.
And that when you make changes in the world, you're not just making decisions for yourself, you're making decisions on behalf of other people.
Oh, yes.
And this, I think anyone who's been paying attention over at least the past year to 18 months, have seen that decisions made by tech companies have a direct impact on other people's lives, right? And you see it in everything from how the political arena has changed. I mean, you all had an election this week, right? Or last week?
Oh, yes, it was on Sunday, right?
Yeah, and I wasn't paying very close attention to the German election, but I'm just extrapolating based on every other election that's happened over the past several years that I'm sure there was some misinformation floating around on the internet in the lead up to that. Just a little bit, just one or two things that maybe not be entirely true. And if you're old enough to remember the time before the internet, or a time when the internet wasn't everywhere all the time, you'll remember that although this type of misinformation existed, it was very hard to distribute it to people, because the only way you could really do that effectively was either by getting it published in a newspaper or on TV or on the radio. And they would have rules to say, like, no, we're not going to publish like blatant lies.
Yes.
This is obviously not true, so we're not going to say this. Or you would have to somehow build enough of an audience that you could manually distribute information to them, like a newsletter or something like that. So the proliferation of misinformation just wasn't as great. But with the internet and with these social media platforms, we now have the capability to distribute misinformation on an enormous scale very quickly. And we've especially seen this around the pandemic, that there's so much misinformation around what drugs are effective, whether or not the vaccine is dangerous, whether or not the pandemic is real, right? And all these things are perpetuated by the platforms who enable us to talk to each other on the internet, not taking responsibility for what those platforms do to the world, right? And their standard stance is to say that we just make a tool, we are not responsible for how people use it. This is the same argument that gun proponents use about guns, right? Guns don't kill people, people kill people, which is nonsense, because if you leave a gun on the floor by itself, it doesn't do anything. It just sits there, right? It's the purpose of a gun isn't to take up space. It is to be used for a specific purpose, right? So the argument
That's a
doesn't
very good
actually apply.
example, right? Yeah. Yeah.
And these tools that we've created are tools we are using to communicate to other people. And in that communication comes this thing about what communication is, which is I have an idea in my head and I try to transfer my idea into your head and make you have the same idea as me, right? But in doing so, I am imposing a force on you to try to change your mind in some way. And depending on our power differential, there's more or less chance of me convincing you, right? And if we give people the power to influence others, we, the people who make that possible, then have a responsibility to ensure that easily influenced people aren't subjected to information that will dissuade them or steer them in a direction that is not in their best interest, especially if that's done in a manipulative way. And tech has very successfully exploited a bunch of implicit biases in human beings to figure out how to get them to engage with content. And what the algorithms and what researchers have found is the best way of doing that is to make them angry. So things like an election or a pandemic are very good baselines, because people are stressed out and afraid, and then you add anger on top of that, and then you get this machine where people will constantly talk on social media about things, and they will gravitate towards other people who agree with them, and they will then reflect that information back to make it look like more people agree with them, and then you get this massive exposure, and all of that makes more money for the platforms. So the platforms are like, the only thing we care about is making money, and this makes money, so we're just going to perpetuate this behavior. But then that's harmful to everyone, right?
That's harmful. That's harmful for the creators and for the people also living with them, to the environment as well. Thank you so much. Look, dear community, we're going to talk about why ethics matters. To some extent, you mentioned some, but maybe you still have some points on these. And then, if it really matters, why is it then difficult to apply ethics in tech industry? And at the end, 3 takeaways you can do right now for more trust, because that's what it's all about, and better business opportunity. Dear Morten, just shortly, I've seen 2 people supporting us and joining us. One is Eric. Thank you so much. Cheers back
Eric.
to Munich. And we've got Andreas from Switzerland. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. And you're saying Norway is also a beautiful country, by the way.
I agree.
Andreas, he agrees. Andrea is a biker, a passionate biker. And I'm sure he had gone there by bike as well, motorcycle.
That sounds very exhausting. It would be a lot of up and down.
Andreas, have you done that by motorbike? Let us know. Right. Now, why does it matter? I mean, your motivation, I've understood in some point as well, but maybe you still would like to wrap that up for our community.
Ethics matters because it's how we negotiate society. If you think about how society works, we're basically trusting each other to not kill each other. That's like the foundation of society, right? And if you go read philosophy, you'll find like there's this famous debate between Thomas Hobbes and what's his first name? Like, Hobbes and Taylor had this debate about whether or not human beings are evil at birth. Right, to say like Hobbes said, like all people are evil by default, and then so they have a social contract to agree with each other to not murder each other, and that's how we create society. And then Taylor was like, that is no, all the way around. We are good by default, and then some people are evil, and then we make society to protect ourselves against the people that are evil. But so this is a classic, and this is like hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So this is a classic debate. But when we look at how society functions, what we see is we, as a community, as a society, agree upon what is right and wrong. Right? We say like doing these things are good things and doing these things are bad things. And the way we determine that is very much based on our own values. So within our community, like you live in Germany, so Germany has a set of values that Germans believe in that is slightly different from the values that Austrians believe in, that is slightly different from the values that Swiss people believe in, that is more different from the values of French people, for example, but maybe closer to Dutch people, maybe more very different from Polish people, like, right? All these different communities have different values. And then within those communities, there are also sets of values. And then we get together and say, so we all have these values, but what can we agree upon, right? And then you start at the baseline and say, like, is it okay to kill people? No. Okay, so we agree upon that. And then we say, what is it okay to take other people's property? No, it's not okay. And we have all these baseline assumptions about society that we all act based on. And then whenever something happens, either we do something ourselves or other people do something, we go and say, how do we determine whether or not this is a good or bad act? And that's what ethics is this methodology that we establish together to determine the goodness or rightness of acts. And we do this all the time, right? You go to the store and someone knocks down a bunch of cans off a shelf and just walks away. And in your brain, you're like, that's not a nice thing to do, right? That's an ethical judgment. You're making an ethical judgment right there, because the majority of people in the community will say, if you knock the cans down, you put them back up again, because it doesn't benefit anyone but yourself to walk away from it. So you have a social responsibility to clean up after yourself, right? And the social responsibility is an ethical judgment about how the world works. So ethics permeates our lives, whether we think about it or not.
Right.
What we need to do is make ethics something that we actively think about doing, right? And this is when you're in a professional setting, ethics becomes complicated or it doesn't become complicated, but it goes from being a tacit thing that just happens in your mind subconsciously to being something you need to actively think about. For example, if you are an engineer and you are building a bridge that people are going to drive cars across, it's not enough for you to say, oh, I'm just going to build a bridge in the cheapest way possible, right? Because then there's a high risk that the bridge will fall down. So instead, you have to say, what are my responsibilities here as the person who designs this bridge and does the math to figure out how strong it needs to be? And the responsibility is, no one should drive across the bridge and just die. That would be terrible, right? Because the bridge shouldn't fall down. And it's my responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. And that's why if you look at how bridges are built, how buildings are built and everything, they're not built to withstand standard forces. They're like built hundreds of times stronger than they need to be to account for the risk involved in doing this, right? Because even if everything is done right, there might be something wrong. So you then account for that by overbuilding, right? And it didn't used to be like that. right? There was a
No,
time
it's
when doctors weren't held responsible for their actions, and they would regularly, do things to patients that were very dangerous. There was a time when engineers weren't held responsible for what they were doing, and they would build really dangerous buildings that would fall down. I mean, there are stories, if you go back to like 18 whatever, and you read stories about building collapses, you'll find like tons of stories of just buildings that were half built and then they just fell down on top of all
and
the
maybe at
workers.
that time it was quite okay and normal.
Yeah, because there was no system in place to ensure that the people making decisions were held to account for what they were doing. And they were also not being told to hold themselves accountable. And then there was a shift in the most professional communities where they said, actually, our decisions impact the lives of other people. So we need to hold ourselves accountable. So that's why doctors, lawyers, accountants, engineers, dentists, everyone who does something that impacts people's lives have a set of professional ethics. And if you break those ethics, you are not allowed to do the work anymore. And more interestingly, if you are a professional within a community and you know someone else is breaking their ethics and you don't say anything, you lose your license as well, because that's not an ethical thing to do. But when you look at tech has been like, we don't do anything to other people, so we're not going to have ethics, right? Or we think that ethics is an encumbrance. So the tech community is basically like lagging 100 years behind everyone else in this realm, in that they're still acting as if we don't have responsibility. While in reality, we do, because if we didn't, we wouldn't be doing this work at all. So that's why it
Definitely.
matters. It is something that's central to humanity, and it's central to community.
Very good. Very good. I love those points. It's central. It's really central. Just like the example building a bridge with technology, with this possibility of sharing news very easily. We have to think. Also, we creators, we users have to think twice whether we are making a positive impact or not.
Mhm.
I once had a human rights expert, and he told me, "Did you know that your rights are already in your phone?" And it made a click on my head. I was like, "Yeah, he's right," and it's also part of the ethics. It
Yep.
is. Did you know that the rights are already here? Right. Thank you so much. Great. Now, our second point will be, why is it then you have understood why it is important? Why is it then very difficult to apply it in the tech industry? But before that, I can see some comments here. We've got Michael from Nairobi. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. He's saying great session. Greetings from Nairobi.
Greetings right back at you.
And Andreas is saying, I've done a
Ja,
lot in Norway, like Trostigen. Ah, I've never been there.
Sognefjord, Haukefjell, Lofoten.
You know
Yeah,
that? All right.
yeah,
But
they're all.
unfortunately, by car. Right. We've got Christian as a software developer. Dear Christian, have you ever talked about ethics with your team? Thank you so much for joining us. And Andrea is saying we had already covered ethics in Swiss Tourism University back in the early
Mhm.
90s, and it was a challenging topic even then. It requires a lot of self-reflection and questioning of one's own and or the company's philosophy. What do you think?
Yeah, and that relates really closely to the next question, which is, why is this difficult?
Okay, then let's go back
Ethics is
to that question. Yeah.
ethics is challenging because it tells us we can't just do whatever we want. It's basically the bottom line. It's like, you, as a person who's working in any kind of industry where you are making something, you often feel this compulsion to be like, oh, I see a problem and I know how to solve it. And then ethics goes and says, before you do that, make sure you're not doing something that could be harmful to someone else. Or even if this solves problem A, it may cause problem B or C, or make problem B and C worse, right? Or this solution helps person A, but then person A can use the solution to harm person B, right? So it puts limits on what we can do, but not in a, you are not allowed to do that, or not in an authority figure comes in and says, here's a list of things you can do and a list of things you can't do. It's more subtle than that. It goes in and says, before you make a decision, make sure that you've thought this through. in many different respects. And this difficult in the tech industry and the design industry, because we've established this ethos within these industries to say, move fast and break things, right? That the chase of technological solutions surpasses or comes above everything else. So we first make a technical solution, and then we look at whether or not it harms people. And you see this when you talk to designers and developers all the time. Like when you ask them about what they're doing, they're saying, "Oh, I'm just designing things. I'm just writing software. I'm just writing code." So it doesn't
because it's possible.
Impact, and it doesn't impact people, right? And it's funny when they say that, because like, well, if it doesn't impact people, then you wouldn't be doing it, right? And I like to say that when you design something, when you build something, you are trying to impose your vision of the future onto other people, right? And this it comes back to this very core idea that any design that you do is actually altering the capabilities of the person using the design in some way, right? You're either giving them a capability to do something, or modifying their capability to do something, or taking it away, right? And acknowledging this fact results in you having to take responsibility for how you are influencing other people. And that's what people have trouble doing, because once you make that acknowledgement, you realize, oh, I have responsibility for this stuff. I can't just make it. I have to take responsibility for what it is used for, or what it can do to people. And that makes work harder, right? And then people say, well, this just gets in the way. It's like a wet blanket that you put on top of the fires of creativity to quell them, right? And what I tell people is, it's not. It's actually more like a hearth, a stove that you put around your fire so that the fire doesn't burn the house down.
Yes.
Right? And if you do it correctly, it'll make the fire far more effective.
Yes.
It'll be possible for us to do far more things. It's not an encumbrance to our work. It's actually a tool we use to make our work better. But it has to be applied in a careful way. Otherwise, we're just like, it just doesn't work.
Exactly. And I love that. Not just doing it because it's possible, because it's cool, but because we make an impact. And if we make an impact, we are taking responsibility. We have to take responsibility. And this should not put us as, how do you call it? Should not hinder us from moving ahead, but instead, actually, it can open better business opportunities. Yeah, especially if you ask in your course, you also ask the question, who are we leaving out? And maybe finding out who are we leaving out will give us other business opportunities, right?
When you talk to people about ethics in business and in technology and in everything else, there's a general assumption that ethics is risk mediation. So like avoiding risk, avoiding people suing you, that kind of stuff, or that it's some sort of literal list of these are the things we are not allowed to do because people say we can't do them, right? And none of that's true. Ethics has nothing to do with either of those things. It has to do with understanding how your decisions are impacting the world and taking responsibility for them, and ensuring that you're not doing things unintentionally that end up being counter to what you intended, right?
Yes, great. Thank you so much. Christian is saying ethics also means trustful cooperation in software projects.
That trust falls under it. I mean, one of the biggest things that's happening because of all this stuff around technology, especially social media, is that it's eroding trust in a very real way. And ethics is the foundation of trust in society, right? When you asked me to come on this talk, you extend your trust to me to be like, he's not going to come on this video and say something horrendously offending, or show images that are extremely harmful, or do anything else, right? And you have no reason to trust me with that. We've never actually met other than talking on the video, except that you've observed me interact with people over time. You've talked to other people who have met me in person, and you extend your trust to all of those interactions. You say like, I don't know you, but I know Eric, and Eric has met you in person. And since I trust Eric, I'm going to trust Morten as well. And then everything will be fine, right? And there's also this implicit trust within society that we behave in responsible ways, right? That if you just give people an opportunity to do something like this, to have a conversation, they're automatically going to err on the side of caution and do the right thing, right? Yeah. Which is also why when something untowards happens, it's very shocking, because there's a breach of this implicit trust in society that we have, right? You
You
walk down the
expect it
street.
anyway, yeah.
If you walk down the street and it's raining and everyone's walking with an umbrella, you don't expect that when you walk past someone that they're going to hit you with the umbrella, right? Because that's not something that people should do. It does happen, but it's when it does, it's a very, very, very jarring thing because that implicit trust is broken. And the implicit trust is what ethics gives us, right? We can have this implicit trust because we know that by and large people act in responsible and ethical ways.
Yes. Yes. I love the answer, or the how you complete it. Very good, very good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We've got Andrea saying, I have to read it because some people may be listening to us without watching. Of course, I relate ethics not only to IT but also to motorcycle travel. We also use IT, but we also consciously and unconsciously cause different things to happen live on the ground. From my point of view, ethics requires an enormous amount of networked thinking, and I don't think you always succeed in correctly evaluating all ethical
Mm-hmm.
aspects with all stakeholders involved. I think you're right. At the very least, it's challenging.
Yeah.
Do you see it the same way? I think it's your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you move to the last question, it kind of that's a good summary of it. The first thing I'll say is, or the last question, like, what can you do? The
All right, I was there.
ethics is a practice in the same way that meditation is a practice, or eating healthy is a practice, or working out is a practice. It's not something that you can say, I have done an ethics. Now everything's fine. It's a whole way of being, right? It's a way of thinking about and interacting with the world, and it's something that we do all the time. And as we do it, we become better at it. And as we do it, we also realize that we can never be perfect. There's no such thing as being perfect. If you go look at what Aristotle was talking about thousands of years ago, Aristotle basically said, you don't know if you are truly an ethical person until your life is over and you can go back and reevaluate all your actions, right?
Wow.
You have to go and look at it from the perspective of the totality of all your actions and whether you improved over time, right?
Oh, yes.
So it's a very much, it's something you keep doing and keep improving and keep like just like design, right? You constantly iterate. So you asked me, like, what are the 3 takeaways people can have from this? Like, here I'm trying to summarize like 10,000 years of moral philosophy in 3 points. The first one is, as any creator, consider and focus on the capabilities you are creating in the visitor, in the user. What can they now do that they were not able to do before? And key to that is to say, does this capability enable the person using your design to be and do what they have reason to value? And do they have the autonomy to choose whether or not they want to use this capability to alter their life in some way, or is it imposed on them, right? Because we are designing capabilities, and then people can take those capabilities and do things in their lives. And we have to consider, are these capabilities meaningful to them so they can do and be what they have reason to value? So we're not imposing our view onto them. That's number 1. Number 2 is ensure that access to the design and the capabilities it produces is equitable and just. So when we build something, we have to ensure that, when we build something, there's an assumption that there's utility to it, right? You get a capability, and the capability has some sort of utility for people. Then we have to ensure that it is accessible and usable for everyone, and that we distribute it in such a way that social factors or historical exclusion or things like that don't impede certain people from using it, but not others, right? So we have to make sure that it's just and fair and equitable to everyone, so that we're not giving someone benefit based on who they are, what they look like, or where they live that other people don't have, that then they can use to take advantage over other people. And the third one is to always remember that when you design or build anything, you are, in a very real sense, carving a path into the future for other people to follow. So it's like when you come to a fresh coat of snow and you're the first person. If you go on your skis across the snow, then you're making a track, and there's a high likelihood that other people will just follow your tracks because that's easier than making your own tracks. That's what we do with all design. We design the future for ourselves and others. And we have to keep in mind that we are building these tracks not only for ourselves and our users, but we're also building the tracks for all the other people who work in our industry. So if you make a decision, you are saying, I want every other person who's facing the same challenge I am right now to make this particular decision, right? You're in Germany, so you are
Yes.
well aware of the problem of 1 million scooters and 1 million rental bikes in the streets, right? Littering everywhere. This is a good example of that. The design in itself is a good idea, that you put rentable scooters on the street and then people can get around safely. But when you scale it up and you have 100 companies do it at the same time, then the streets become mainly scooters and not people. And it becomes a huge public issue that there are all these scooters in place, right? Because scale wasn't considered properly. And there was a path carved that a lot of companies followed. And the consequence of a lot of companies following the path is it creates new problems. And it becomes an ethics issue.
Yes. So you mean while designing, I should imagine, what about in 10 years or even less, if we scale it up, if many people follow my way, would it be still a good thing, right?
Yeah. And if you're a business of any kind, you have to think, the thing that I am doing now, is this the thing I would want all my competitors to do as well? And would it be beneficial to me, to my family, to society, if all my competitors also did this thing? Or is there some way I can do it so that, if everyone did it, it would still be beneficial?
Yes.
Instead of once people start doing it all over the board, then it becomes a problem.
Yes. Great.
It's difficult because it's a very different way of thinking about things. It's not how we normally think about things. But...
Yeah, it is, but it's worth it. I mean, the first, just to wrap up the capabilities, is it what we really want? Is it also creating the value things that people value, or the modification people value? And then you talked about fairness. That's an issue. We did that without technology. And now, because technology is really fast, it's worth stepping back and asking ourselves, because the gap will be, if you don't mind the gap, it will increase, right? So is it really fair? And then the issue of creating or paving a path that we would love others to follow. It's difficult, but it's worth it. For me, it's taking responsibility.
Yeah. It is the core of humanity and society in a very real sense.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so
much. Let me just show some 4 comments, then you're done. Hi, Walter. Thank you for joining us. You're saying ethics has the same bad cards like safety or privacy. They're only an annoying byproduct of the main goal, namely making money by offering a product people will buy. Porsche said once, we make cars nobody needs, but everybody wants. Wow.
Yeah, that's a good example of business thinking about themselves first and how they're. But he has a point. I mean, there is this general feeling often that, like I said, ethics is a wet blanket that you put on top of things, and there's a shift, I think, in the community in the world now, where people are starting to realize that actually the ethics of companies has a tremendous impact on the world. So I think that there's a tide turning here, but it requires a lot of manhandling to get it to turn enough that it starts making a difference.
Yes. So. It's closely linked to the sustainability, just another buzzword coming up, but it's closely linked to that, as I can see. Thank you so much, Walter. Andrea says, a question for you outside the topic. Are you sitting in a recording studio?
Yeah. I'm standing in a recording studio. This is my recording booth. This is where I record all my courses for LinkedIn Learning.
Great. Pleasure to meet you there. Walter continues saying ethics is the feedback of our actions.
Yes and no. Ethics is there's there's like this weird distinction between morals and ethics. So morals are personal judgments about what is good and right in the world. Ethics are the tools we use to judge goodness and rightness as a community. So they're not so much the feedback as they are projections about good and rightness. They can be used as a judge post fact. So you can say like, this thing happened, is this a good or bad thing? Which is usually how we do it. But it can also be used as a proactive tool to say, if we do this thing, will it be good or bad, right? So the ethics is less active, not a specific thing. It's more a tool kit that we use to determine things as society. And you'll notice that the ethics of different communities are different because different communities have different values, right? So in finding a universal ethics that everyone can agree upon is therefore very difficult because people think different things and mean different things. That's why we have countries.
Yes, and we have different cultures and
different laws.
But still, we have also the human rights that should apply to everyone. So, right. Thank you so much, Walter. And Andreas is saying it's a whole way of being. I think that's a quote, what you said.
Correct.
He likes that. Thank you so much. Eric, thank you so much. Thank you too. Great thoughts. That's what you like.
Like, that's enough of that.
Looking forward too. And Christian is also saying thanks for your thoughts. Thank you to dear community for joining us, for your comments. Thank you, dear Morten. I'm getting closer.
Good job.
for these great jobs and also for your LinkedIn learning courses. I'm still going to enjoy a lot of them. Please follow Morten and we keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you at the backstage. Bye-bye.
Bye.